Hello everyone and welcome back to Haunted Hues. I know many of you tune into these videos to help you drift off to sleep, but before you get cozy, I thought it would be fun to hear from all of you. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from around the world. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive in. My name is Alex. I'm a writer, or at least I try to be. Most of the time, I sit in my cramped apartment staring at a blank screen, hoping for inspiration to hit. So, when I found this secluded cabin in the woods available for rent, I thought it would be the perfect getaway. Just me, my laptop, and a whole lot of peace and quiet. What could go wrong? The drive to the cabin was a bit of a nightmare. The road was narrow, winding, and surrounded by thick trees that seemed to close in on me. I kept glancing at my phone, wondering if I had taken a wrong turn. But after what felt like forever, I finally pulled up to the cabin. It looked just like the pictures, old and weathered, with peeling paint and a creaky porch. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at it. Was I really going to spend 2 weeks here? I took a deep breath and stepped out. The air was fresh, but had that earthy smell of damp leaves and moss. I grabbed my suitcase and headed inside. The door creaked open, and I was hit with a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. The inside was dark and a bit gloomy, with old furniture that looked like it had seen better days. I could feel the weight of silence pressing down on me. I dragged my suitcase upstairs to the bedroom. The bed looked okay, even if the mattress was a bit lumpy. I threw my stuff on the bed and pulled out my laptop. I was ready to write. Or at least, I wanted to be. I sat at the desk by the window, staring at the blank screen. Nothing came to mind. After a while, I decided to explore the cabin a bit. The kitchen was small and outdated, with a fridge that looked like it belonged in a museum. I opened the cupboards, hoping to find some snacks, but they were all empty. The living room had a couch that looked like it had been around since the 70s and a TV that didn't even have a remote. I flicked it on, but all I got was static. Great. Feeling a bit restless, I wandered down to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was dark and damp down there, and I had to fumble around to find the light switch. When I finally got it on, the light flickered, revealing a cluttered space filled with old junk. There were broken chairs, dusty boxes, and a washing machine that looked like it hadn't worked in years. As I shined my flashlight around, I noticed something on the wall. I moved closer, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a strange symbol carved into the wood. It looked like a circle with a triangle inside it. I reached out to touch it, but something made me pull my hand back. I felt a chill run through me, and I quickly backed away, locking the basement door behind me as I went back upstairs. I tried to write again, but my mind kept drifting back to that symbol. What did it mean? Why was it down there? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. I needed to focus. But as night fell, the cabin took on a different vibe. The wind howled outside, and the trees rattled against the windows. I curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket over me, hoping to find some comfort in the familiar act of watching TV. But the static was annoying, so I turned it off and sat in the silence. That's when I started hearing things. The wind outside was one thing, but then I heard creaking noises from upstairs. I held my breath, straining to listen. It sounded like footsteps. I told myself it was just the old house settling, but my heart raced anyway. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't a restful sleep. I kept dreaming about that symbol in the basement. In my dream, it glowed with a strange light, and I felt trapped, unable to move. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. The cabin was dark, and I glanced at my phone. It was 3 a.m. I lay back down, trying to calm myself, but then I heard it, a soft whisper, like someone was right next to me. I froze, my heart racing again. I sat up, scanning the room with my phone's flashlight, but there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing on the walls. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I lay back down, pulling the blanket over my head, hoping to block out whatever was happening. But the noises continued, creaking, rustling, and that whispering sound. I felt like I was losing my mind. I finally couldn't take it anymore. I jumped off the couch and bolted for the front door. I flung it open and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, my heart still pounding in my chest. I pulled over, trying to catch my breath. What just happened? Was I really hearing things? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that cabin. The next day, I decided to do some research. I found a small cafe nearby and asked the barista about the cabin. She gave me a strange look and told me there were local legends about it. Apparently, decades ago, there was a horrific ritual that took place there. People had gone missing, and some said the spirits of those who died still lingered in the woods. I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke, and I realized that my instincts had been right. I drove back to the cabin, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I packed up my things, ready to leave. I didn't want to be there anymore. The cabin had a dark history, and I didn't want to be a part of it. I glanced at the old photograph I had found in the drawer, the faces scratched out. It felt like a warning. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I realized that some stories are better left untold, and some places should remain undisturbed. The cabin was one of those places. I didn't want to be haunted by whatever had happened there, or by the whispers that had called my name in the dark. I just wanted to go home and forget. My name is Rachel, and I've always felt a bit disconnected from my family. Growing up, I heard bits and pieces about my relatives, but I never really knew them. So, when I got the chance to visit my family's old farmhouse for the autumn break, I thought it would be a good opportunity to reconnect with my roots. Little did I know, the visit would uncover secrets that would change everything. The farmhouse looked charming from the outside, with its warm, inviting colors and a big porch that wrapped around the front. It was the kind of place you'd see in a postcard, surrounded by trees that were just starting to change color. I parked my car and took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. As I stepped out, the crunch of leaves under my feet reminded me how long it had been since I'd been here. Inside, the house had a cozy feel, with wooden floors and family photos lining the walls. But there was something else too. A chill hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were whispering secrets. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. I was greeted by my estranged cousin, Mark. We hadn't seen each other in years, and it felt awkward. He seemed uneasy too, glancing around as if he expected something to jump out at him. He warned me about the house, saying it had a history that wasn't exactly pleasant. I didn't think much of it at the time. Old houses always have stories, right? As I settled in, I started exploring the place. The living room was filled with old furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in ages. Dust danced in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. I wandered into the kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon from a pie baking in the oven filled the air. It was comforting, but still, I felt that strange chill. Later that evening, after dinner, I decided to check out the upstairs. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I opened the first door I came to, revealing a small bedroom that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The bed was neatly made, but the dust on the dresser told me no one had been in here for a long time. As I rummaged through the drawers, I found an old photo album. It was worn and faded, but I could still make out the faces in the pictures. They were all family members, some I recognized and some I didn't. Flipping through the pages, I felt a strange connection to these people. They were my family, after all. Then I stumbled upon a photo that made my heart stop. It was a picture of the farmhouse, but there was something off about it. In the background, I could see a figure standing by a tree. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a woman. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned the page, hoping to find something less unsettling, but instead, I found more pictures of the same woman, always in the background, always watching. I closed the album, my hands trembling. What was going on? I felt a knot in my stomach as I thought about Mark's warning. I decided to find him and ask him about the woman in the photos. When I found him in the living room, he was staring out the window, lost in thought. I hesitated, unsure of how to bring it up. Instead, I went back to my room, feeling uneasy. I tried to shake it off and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept hearing strange noises, whispers that seemed to float through the air, and cold drafts that made the hair on my arms stand up. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to confront Mark about the photos. I found him in the kitchen, making coffee. I asked him about the woman, but he looked at me with a mix of fear and sadness. He hesitated before finally telling me that the woman was a family member who had died tragically in the house many years ago. Her name was Elizabeth, and her death had left a dark mark on the family. Mark explained that Elizabeth had been involved in a terrible accident. The details were hazy, but he mentioned something about a fire that had consumed part of the house. The family had never really talked about it, and the whispers I heard at night were said to be her spirit, lingering in the house, unable to move on. I felt a chill run through me as I listened. It was like a weight had settled in my chest. I wanted to know more, but I also felt a sense of dread. I was torn between my desire to learn about my family and the fear of what I might uncover. I decided to dig deeper. I spent the day searching through old boxes in the attic, hoping to find more information about Elizabeth and the accident. As I sifted through dusty old papers and forgotten trinkets, I found a journal. It belonged to Elizabeth, and as I opened it, I felt a rush of emotions. Her handwriting was elegant, and the pages were filled with her thoughts and dreams. But as I read on, the tone shifted. She wrote about feeling trapped in the house, about the whispers that haunted her at night. It was as if she knew something terrible was coming. The last entry sent chills down my spine. Elizabeth described a feeling of impending doom, as if she was being watched. She wrote about a dark presence in the house, something that made her feel unsafe. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit together. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I could feel the cold air creeping in through the cracks in the walls. I thought about Elizabeth and her tragic fate. I felt a deep sadness for her, but also a strange connection. It was as if she was reaching out to me from beyond the grave. I decided I needed to confront whatever was haunting the house. I gathered my courage and went downstairs, determined to face the darkness. The living room was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to dance around me. I felt a chill run through my body as I called out to Elizabeth, asking her to show herself. At first, nothing happened. I stood there, heart racing, waiting for a sign. Then, slowly, the temperature dropped even more. I could see my breath in front of me, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around my head. I felt a presence behind me, and I turned to see a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by shadows. I froze, fear gripping me. But then I remembered Elizabeth's journal. She had been trapped, unable to move on. I took a deep breath and spoke to her, telling her I understood her pain. I wanted to help her find peace. The figure seemed to waver, and the whispers began to quiet down. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions, sadness, fear, but also compassion. I reached out, as if trying to bridge the gap between our worlds. The figure slowly moved closer, and I could see her face more clearly. It was Elizabeth. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but also a glimmer of hope. I realized then that the family secret wasn't just about Elizabeth's tragic past. It was about the pain that had lingered in the house, the darkness that had seeped into our family. I promised her that I would share her story, that I wouldn't let her be forgotten. The air around me began to shift, and I felt a warmth spread through the room. As I stood there, I felt a sense of release. The whispers faded away, and the cold drafts disappeared. Elizabeth's figure slowly began to dissolve, and I knew she was finally free. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that I had helped her find peace. The next morning, I packed my bags, feeling a heavy heart but also a sense of closure. I knew I could never truly escape my family's history, but I also understood that some secrets were better left buried. As I drove away from the farmhouse, I glanced back one last time. The house stood there, quiet and still, but I felt a sense of calm surrounding it. I realized that I would carry Elizabeth's story with me, and I would make sure it was told. Some secrets may linger in the shadows, but they don't have to define us. I left the farmhouse with a newfound understanding of my family, ready to embrace my roots while also letting go of the past. My name is Alone, and I was really looking forward to this summer. I had booked a cozy beach house for a week-long family vacation, hoping to create some amazing memories with my two kids, Lily and Max. The beach house looked perfect in the photos, bright, airy, and just steps from the ocean. I imagined us building sandcastles, splashing in the waves, and enjoying sunsets together. But when we arrived, things didn't feel quite right. The house was just as beautiful as I remembered, with big windows that overlooked the ocean. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was soothing, but there was something heavy in the air. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I brushed it off as nerves and focused on getting the kids settled in. Lily and Max were excited, running around the house, exploring every corner. I tried to keep up their energy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I stepped outside to take in a view, I noticed a pair of old sandals on the porch. They were worn and faded, definitely not belonging to anyone in my family. I picked them up, feeling a chill run down my spine. Who had left them there? I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the beach was empty. I tossed the sandals aside, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the last renters had forgotten them. Still, I felt uneasy. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I wanted this vacation to be fun for the kids, so I pushed the thought out of my mind and suggested we head to the beach. The first day was a blast. We built sandcastles, collected seashells, and splashed in the waves. I watched my kids laugh and play, and for a moment, I forgot about the sandals and the strange feeling in the house. But as night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The ocean's roar became louder, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I heard strange noises coming from the living room. It sounded like whispers, soft and unintelligible. I tried to brush it off as the wind, but it felt like something was off. I peeked into the living room, but everything was quiet. I told myself I was imagining things and went to bed, hoping for a better day tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious. I tried to shake it off and planned a fun day at the beach. But as the day went on, the strange occurrences continued. Doors would creak open on their own, and I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. I started to feel like I was being watched. Lily and Max seemed to sense it too. They would look around nervously, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. I tried to keep our activities light and fun, but I could feel my worry creeping in. I didn't want to ruin the vacation, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. I decided to do some research on the beach house, hoping to find some answers. I pulled out my laptop and started looking up the rental history, but I didn't find much. Just the usual stuff about how great the location was. Nothing about the house itself. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again. They seemed closer this time, echoing through the dark. I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and I pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to ignore it. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next day, I decided to take the kids to a nearby amusement park to get our minds off things. We had a great time, but as we drove back to the beach house, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When we arrived, I noticed the sandals were still on the porch. I picked them up again, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. I tossed them into a nearby trash can, hoping that would help. That night, I went to bed feeling exhausted but relieved to have the sandals out of sight. I fell asleep quickly, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake. I glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. The house was silent, but I could hear laughter coming from the beach. It was a child's laughter, bright and cheerful, but it sent chills down my spine. I sat up, straining to listen. Was one of my kids outside? I rushed to the window, throwing back the curtains. The moonlight illuminated the beach, but there was no one there. Panic set in as I realized I needed to check on Lily and Max. I threw on a robe and hurried down the hallway, my heart racing. When I reached their room, I opened the door and felt a wave of relief wash over me. They were both sound asleep in their beds. I quietly walked back to my room, but as I passed the living room, I froze. The front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it open. I crept over to the door, peering outside. The beach was empty, but the laughter echoed in my ears. I stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against my skin. The sound seemed to be coming from the water. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. I called out for my kids, but there was no response. Suddenly, I heard a giggle, and I turned to see Max standing at the edge of the porch. He looked up at me with wide eyes, a smile on his face. I felt a rush of relief, but also confusion. How had he gotten outside? I quickly pulled him back inside, my heart racing. I sat him down on the couch, trying to catch my breath. I asked him what he was doing outside, but he just giggled again and said he was playing with his new friend. My stomach dropped. What new friend? I felt a knot tighten in my chest as I tried to keep my voice steady. He pointed out the window, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I looked outside, but all I saw was the dark beach and the crashing waves. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I didn't want to know who or what this friend was. I decided it was time to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was haunted, and I didn't want to put my kids in danger. I gathered their things quietly, trying not to wake Lily. As I packed, I glanced at the old sandals I had thrown away earlier. They were back on the porch, sitting there like a reminder of everything that had happened. I rushed to wake Lily, and when she groggily opened her eyes, I could see the confusion on her face. I explained we were leaving, and she didn't argue. She must have sensed something was wrong too. I quickly packed up the car, my heart racing as I glanced back at the house one last time. As we drove away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I had hoped for a fun family vacation, but instead, I was leaving with a heavy heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us, something that didn't want us there. Once we were back on the road, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I promised myself I would do thorough research before booking any rentals in the future. I wouldn't let myself be caught off guard again. As we drove away from the beach house, I glanced back one last time. The house stood there, quiet and still, but I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had escaped whatever had lingered there, but I knew I would never forget the uninvited guest that had made our vacation so unsettling. I vowed to always trust my instincts and to protect my family, no matter what. Some places are better left unexplored, and some memories are best created in a safe and loving environment. I knew I would always cherish the time spent with my kids, but I also learned to be cautious about where we made those memories. My name is Isla, and I've always had a knack for adventure. I thrive on curiosity, and when my friend Mike invited me to spend the weekend at his family's old Victorian house, I couldn't resist. I had heard whispers about the place being haunted, and I was eager to explore every inch of it. The house stood proudly at the end of a long, winding driveway, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to sway with secrets. Its charming exterior, complete with a wraparound porch and intricate woodwork, made it look like something out of a storybook. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt a strange energy in the air. The atmosphere was thick, almost suffocating, and there was a musty smell that lingered in the corners, as if the house hadn't breathed in years. Mike chuckled as he watched me take in the surroundings. "Yeah, the house has a bit of a creepy vibe, doesn't it?" he said, grinning. "Wait until you see the basement. It's like something out of a horror movie." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to play it cool. "Bring it on," I said, flashing a confident smile. "I'm not scared of a little basement." As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, and I kept catching glimpses of shadows darting just out of sight. Mike noticed my jumpiness and teased me mercilessly, but I could feel my heart racing. "Isla, you're not really scared, are you?" he laughed, nudging me playfully. I rolled my eyes, trying to act nonchalant, but deep down, I was starting to wonder if I had bitten off more than I could chew. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It sounded like a scratching sound, followed by a thump. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained my ears, trying to figure out what it could be. After a few minutes, the noise stopped, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours before finally drifting off to sleep. The next morning, I decided to explore the basement, despite Mike's protests. "Dude, that place is creepy as hell." "I wouldn't go down there if I were you," he said, shaking his head. But curiosity got the better of me, and I was determined to see what lay beneath the house. As I made my way down the rickety stairs, I couldn't help but notice how much colder it was down there. The air was damp and musty, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I shone my flashlight around, taking in the dusty old furniture and cobweb-covered corners. The basement was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to dance around me, creating an eerie atmosphere that made my heart race. That's when I noticed it, the door at the back of the basement that I hadn't seen before. It was locked, but I could feel a strange pull towards it, like it was calling to me. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the basement was empty. My heart raced with excitement and fear. What could be behind that door? I rummaged around until I found an old key that seemed to fit the lock. My hands were shaking as I turned it, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. What I saw inside made my stomach turn. The room was filled with strange artifacts, old dolls with missing eyes, jars filled with what looked like animal parts, and a large, dusty book that seemed to be a journal. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and began to flip through the pages. The journal belonged to the previous owner of the house, a man named Edward. His writing was shaky and erratic, and the pages were stained with what looked like blood. As I read on, I realized that Edward had been descending into madness, obsessed with the occult and dark magic. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. He wrote about his experiments with summoning spirits and his attempts to open a portal to another dimension. His words were filled with desperation, detailing how the voices in his head urged him to do terrible things. the further I read, the more I felt a chill creep up my spine. I could almost hear the whispers echoing in my mind, urging me to keep reading, to uncover more secrets. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the basement, followed by Mike's voice. "Isla, are you down there?" Panic surged through me as I quickly shoved the journal back into the room and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding. Mike was standing in the middle of the basement, looking concerned. "Are you okay?" "I heard a noise and came to check on you." I nodded, trying to catch my breath. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just exploring, you know." He raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. We packed up our things and left the house immediately, neither of us saying a word. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the old Victorian, its windows staring at us like empty eyes. I shuddered and turned my attention back to the road, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had discovered. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found in that room. The images of the strange artifacts and the journal's disturbing contents haunted my dreams. I realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. I never went back to the house, and I never told anyone what I had discovered. I knew that if I did, it would only lead to more questions and more danger. I had learned my lesson about curiosity and its consequences, and I vowed to be more cautious in the future. As for Mike, he never mentioned the incident again. I think he sensed that something had changed in me, that I had seen something that had shaken me to my core. We drifted apart after that, each of us going our separate ways. But I'll never forget that weekend in the old Victorian house, and the secrets that lurk in the shadows. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, and some doors are better left unopened. I learned that the hard way, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Weeks turned into months, but the memory of that basement haunted me. I found myself researching the history of the house online, trying to piece together the life of Edward and his descent into madness. The more I learned, the more I wished I hadn't opened that door. I discovered that Edward had lived in the house alone for many years. Neighbors reported strange noises coming from the property, and some even claimed to have seen him wandering the grounds at odd hours, muttering to himself. It was said that he had become increasingly reclusive, shutting himself away from the world as his obsession grew. The final entry in his journal, which I hadn't read completely, was chilling. He wrote about a ritual he planned to perform, one that would supposedly allow him to communicate with the dead. He believed he could harness their power, but it was clear he was losing his grip on reality. The last line read, "If I succeed, I will not be alone anymore." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized what that meant. Had he succeeded? Was he still in that house, trapped between worlds? I shuddered at the thought and decided it was time to put the past behind me. I needed to move on. But the memory of the basement lingered, and I found myself avoiding dark places, especially basements. I would often catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Edward's ghost lurking in the shadows. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep-seated anxiety that had taken root in my mind. One evening, while I was at home, I decided to invite some friends over for a movie night. I thought it would be a good distraction, a way to shake off the lingering unease. As we settled in with popcorn and blankets, I tried to push thoughts of the basement out of my mind. But as the night wore on, the feeling crept back in. The movie was a horror flick, and every creak of the house made me jump. My friends laughed at my reactions, but I couldn't help it. I felt like I was back in that basement, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. Later that night, as everyone was leaving, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was just a shadow, but it sent a chill down my spine. I brushed it off as my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the weeks that followed, I found myself unable to shake the memories of that weekend. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the thought of Edward and his madness. I decided to confront my fears head-on. I made plans to return to the Victorian house, determined to face whatever was lurking in the basement. I told Mike about my decision, and he looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Are you sure about this?" "You don't have to go back," he said, concern etched on his face. But I was resolute. I needed closure. The day finally arrived, and I drove to the house with a mix of excitement and dread. The sky was overcast, casting a gloomy shadow over the property. I parked and took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I stepped inside, the familiar musty smell hit me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I made my way to the basement, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was thick with tension, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated for a moment, then steeled myself and turned on my flashlight. The basement looked just as I remembered, dark, dusty, and filled with shadows. I took a deep breath and walked toward the locked door at the back. My hands trembled as I pulled out the old key, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the creaking sound echoing in the silence. The room inside was dimly lit, and I stepped in cautiously. The artifacts were still there, untouched, but the journal was gone. Panic surged through me as I scanned the room, searching for any sign of it. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. It called my name, sending chills down my spine. I turned around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The shadows seemed to shift, and I felt a cold breeze wash over me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I could feel the presence closing in, and I knew I had to confront it. I took a deep breath and shouted, "What do you want?" Silence fell, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I spun around to see Edward standing there, his eyes wild and filled with madness. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I stood my ground. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice shaking. "You can't keep me here." To my surprise, he stepped back, as if my words had some power over him. The whispers quieted, and I felt the pressure in the room begin to lift. I turned back to the door and pulled on the handle with all my strength. It swung open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding. I burst through the front door and into the fresh air, feeling the weight of the house lift off my shoulders. I glanced back at the Victorian, its windows staring at me like empty eyes, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had faced my fears and confronted the darkness that had haunted me for so long. I knew I would never forget that weekend or the secrets that lurked in the shadows. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, and some doors are better left unopened. I learned that the hard way, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. As I drove away, I felt a sense of closure. I had faced the darkness, and though it would always be a part of me, I was ready to move on. I promised myself that I would embrace the light and cherish the adventures that lay ahead, leaving the shadows behind. In the end, I realized that curiosity can lead us to incredible places, but it can also uncover things we're not ready to face. I would always be an explorer at heart, but I now understood the importance of knowing when to turn back. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some basements are better left unexplored. My name is Kevin, and I'm a curious teenager who loves exploring. This winter, my family decided to take a holiday trip to my great-aunt's old house. I had heard stories about this place growing up, how it was charming but also a little creepy. I was excited to see it for myself, especially the attic, which everyone said was filled with old stuff and maybe even some ghosts. When we arrived, the house looked just like I imagined. It had a big front porch, tall windows, and a roof that slanted down like it was trying to hide from the world. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay hung in the corners. It felt like stepping back in time. My parents were busy unpacking, and my little sister, Mia, was already complaining about how spooky the place felt. She was easily frightened, and I knew I had to be careful not to freak her out too much. After settling in, I couldn't resist the pull of the attic any longer. I had heard strange noises coming from up there, creaks and thumps that made my heart race. I told myself it was just the old house settling, but a part of me was dying to find out what was really up there. I glanced at Mia, who was playing with her dolls in the living room, and decided to sneak away. I climbed a narrow staircase that led to the attic. Each step creaked under my weight, and I could feel the excitement building in my chest. When I reached the top, I pushed open the heavy door, and it groaned in protest. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets and boxes stacked haphazardly in the corners. A single window let in a sliver of light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. As I stepped inside, I heard a noise, a faint rustling sound that made me freeze. My heart raced, and I felt a mix of bravery and fear. Was it just the wind? Or was there something, or someone, up here with me? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and moved further into the attic. The noises grew louder, echoing off the walls. I could have sworn I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed through it. I was determined to find out what was making the noise. I started rummaging through some boxes, pulling out old toys and clothes that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There were dusty books and faded photographs, all telling stories of the past. But nothing seemed to explain the sounds I had heard. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted an old trunk in the far corner, half hidden under a pile of blankets. My curiosity piqued. I made my way over to the trunk. It was heavy and covered in dust, but the lock was broken, so I lifted the lid with a creak. Inside, I found a jumble of personal belongings, old letters, a few pieces of jewelry, and a diary. My heart raced as I picked up the diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. I opened it carefully, and the first page was filled with neat handwriting. The diary belonged to a girl named Clara, who had lived in this house many years ago. As I read through the pages, I learned about her life, her dreams, her friends, and her family. But as I flipped further into the diary, the tone changed. Clara began to write about feeling trapped in the house, about strange noises and shadows that seemed to follow her. The last entry sent chills down my spine. Clara wrote about a day when she went missing. She described feeling watched and wrote that she was afraid to be alone. The last line read, "If anyone finds this, know that I am not gone, just lost." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. What had happened to her? Why did she disappear? The attic felt heavier now, as if Clara's presence lingered in the air. I glanced around, half expecting to see her ghostly figure standing in the shadows. The noises I had heard earlier now felt like echoes of her story, calling out to me from the past. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the basement, followed by Mia's voice. I quickly shoved the diary back into the trunk and slammed the lid shut, locking it behind me. I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding. Mia was standing in the middle of the living room, looking concerned. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. I was fine, just exploring, you know? But I felt uneasy. I wanted to tell my family about Clara when I went downstairs. They needed to know the history of the house, to remember the girl who had lived there and the mystery of her disappearance. That night, as we sat around the fireplace, I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was still in the house, watching over us. The wind howled outside, and the old house creaked and groaned, but I felt a sense of comfort knowing that I had uncovered a piece of its history. I realized that some stories are meant to be remembered, not forgotten. The next day, I returned to the attic, determined to show Mia the trunk and the diary. I wanted her to understand the importance of Clara's story. As we climbed the stairs, I could feel the air grow colder, and I glanced at Mia, who was clinging to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. When we reached the attic, I opened the trunk again, and we began to sift through the items inside. I showed her the diary, and as she read Clara's words, I could see her expression change from fear to curiosity. We spent hours up there, talking about Clara and what her life must have been like. I felt a bond forming between us, and I was grateful that I could share this experience with my sister. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows in the attic, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that Clara's story would not be forgotten. I promised myself that I would keep her memory alive, sharing it with anyone who would listen. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Clara and what had happened to her. I hoped she had found peace, wherever she was. I realized that the house was more than just a place, it was a vessel of memories, both good and bad. It held the stories of those who had come before us, and it was our responsibility to remember them. The next morning, we packed our things and prepared to leave the house. As I walked through each room, I took a moment to say goodbye. I whispered a silent promise to Clara, vowing to remember her and share her story with others. I wanted her to know that she was not forgotten. As we drove away, I glanced back at the old Victorian house, its windows glinting in the sunlight. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that I had uncovered a piece of its history. I realized that some stories are meant to be told, and some ghosts are meant to be remembered. In the months that followed, I shared Clara's story with my friends and family. I wrote about her in my journal, capturing the essence of her life and the mystery of her disappearance. I felt a sense of purpose, knowing that I was keeping her memory alive. Looking back, I understood that my curiosity had led me to uncover something truly special. I had faced my fears in that attic, and in doing so, I had learned the importance of remembering those who came before us. Clara's story would live on, and I would carry her memory with me, a reminder that some stories are meant to be cherished, not forgotten. My name is Jamie, and I was so hyped for this weekend getaway with my friends. We had booked this trendy apartment in the city for a holiday weekend, and I couldn't wait to explore the place and have some fun. The apartment looked amazing in the photos, sleek furniture, stunning view, and right in the heart of the action. I was ready to leave the stress of college behind and just chill with my crew. When we arrived at the address, I could already tell something was off. The building looked a bit run down, and the hallway was dimly lit. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the photos were just really good. But as soon as we opened the apartment door, I knew we were in for a wild ride. There was another group of people already inside, lounging on the couch and looking as confused as we were. I felt my stomach drop. This couldn't be happening. We had booked this place weeks ago. I glanced at my friends, and I could see the panic starting to set in. We were supposed to be relaxing and having a blast, not dealing with some weird double booking situation. I took a deep breath and tried to stay cool, but inside, I was freaking out. The other group seemed just as surprised to see us. They started asking questions, and it was clear that they had also booked the apartment for the weekend. I wanted to scream. What kind of messed up host would do this to us? I could feel the tension building in the room, and I knew we had to figure out what to do next. We tried calling the host, but they didn't pick up. We sent texts, but no response. I was starting to get a bad feeling about this whole thing. My friends were getting restless, and the other group was getting more and more agitated. I knew we had to take matters into our own hands. We decided to split up and explore the apartment, hoping to find some clues about what was going on. I headed to the bedroom, my heart racing. What if the host was some kind of weirdo who was watching us right now? I shuddered at the thought. I started rummaging through the drawers, looking for anything that could help us figure out what was happening. That's when I found it, a stack of keys. all labeled with different apartment numbers. My stomach turned. This was no ordinary apartment mix-up. The host was running some kind of scam, double booking apartments and pocketing the cash. I felt sick to my stomach. We had been duped, and now we were stuck in the middle of this mess. I rushed back to the living room, my mind racing. I had to tell the others what I had found. But when I got there, things had taken a turn for the worse. The two groups were in each other's faces, shouting and pointing fingers. I could see the anger and frustration in their eyes, and I knew we had to get out of there before things got physical. I tried to calm everyone down, but it was no use. The situation had spiraled out of control. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the apartment was plunged into darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. What was happening? I could hear the others shouting, and I felt a hand grab my arm. It was one of my friends, and they were shaking. We huddled together, trying to stay calm. But then we heard it, a strange noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone out there? I gripped my friend's hand tighter, and we waited, holding our breath. The noise grew closer, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as possible. But I knew I couldn't leave my friends behind. We had to stick together, no matter what. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. But the relief was short-lived. The apartment was a mess, with furniture overturned and pillows scattered everywhere. And there, in the middle of it all, was the host, looking frantic and disheveled. They started apologizing, saying they had made a mistake and that they would make it right. But we weren't buying it. We knew the truth now, and we weren't going to let them get away with it. We demanded our money back and threatened to call the cops if they didn't cooperate. The host panicked, realizing they had been caught. They started begging us not to call the police, saying they would give us a refund. We agreed, but only because we wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. We grabbed our stuff and headed for the door, our hearts still racing. As we stepped out into the night, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had made it out alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What if the host came after us? What if they tried to pull the same scam on someone else? I knew we had to do something. We decided to report the host to the rental company and leave a scathing review online. We wanted to warn others about what had happened, to make sure no one else fell victim to their scheme. It was the least we could do, after the nightmare we had just been through. As for the rest of the weekend, it was a bust. We ended up crashing at a friend's place, but the excitement was gone. We were all shaken by what had happened, and it was hard to relax and have fun. I kept replaying the events in my mind, wondering how we could have been so naive. But in the end, I realized that it wasn't our fault. We had done our research, booked a place that looked legit, and trusted the process. We were the victims here, not the perpetrators. And that's what I told myself as I tried to move on from the experience. I learned a valuable lesson that weekend: always double-check listings, trust your instincts, and never let your guard down, even in a place that seems safe. The world can be a crazy place, and sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who will let you down. As for the host, I hope they learned their lesson too. Karma has a way of catching up with people who try to take advantage of others. And if they ever try to pull that scam again, I hope someone is there to stop them in their tracks. In the end, it was a weekend I'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons. But I'm grateful that I had my friends by my side, and that we made it out of there in one piece. It's a reminder that no matter how bad things get, you can always count on the people who matter most to have your back. So, if you're ever planning a weekend getaway, make sure you do your homework, trust your gut, and always have a backup plan. You never know what kind of craziness might be waiting for you around the corner. But with the right people by your side, you can handle anything that comes your way. A few days after the incident, I got a call from the rental company. They had investigated the situation and found that the host had been running this scam for months, double booking apartments and pocketing the cash. They were shutting down the listing and refunding everyone who had been affected. I felt a sense of relief knowing that the host had been caught and that no one else would fall victim to their scheme. But I also felt a twinge of sadness, knowing that the rental company had been complicit in this whole mess. They should have done more to vet their hosts and ensure the safety of their guests. I decided to take the refund money and put it towards a trip with my friends to a place we knew we could trust. We did our research, read reviews, and booked a place that was legitimate. And when we arrived, we were greeted with open arms and a genuine sense of hospitality. It was the perfect antidote to the nightmare we had experienced in the city. We laughed, we explored, and we made memories that would last a lifetime. And every time we looked back on that trip, we knew that we had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of trust, instinct, and always being prepared for the unexpected. As for the city apartment, it became a distant memory, a cautionary tale that we would tell to our friends and family. We warned them about the dangers of booking with unverified hosts and the importance of always having a backup plan. And we took comfort in the knowledge that we had come out of that experience stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. In the end, the double-booked nightmare was a wake-up call, a reminder that the world is not always as it seems. But it was also a testament to the power of friendship, resilience, and the ability to bounce back from even the most challenging of situations. And for that, I will always be grateful. My name is Tom, and I'm the curious uncle in the family. I've always loved a good mystery. So when my sister invited me to her charming cottage for a family reunion, I couldn't resist. The place looked amazing in the pictures, cozy and inviting, with a big backyard perfect for barbecues and games. I was excited to spend some quality time with my family and maybe even solve a mystery or two along the way. As soon as we arrived, I could tell this place was special. The cottage had a certain character to it, with its weatherwood siding and quirky little details. My nieces and nephews were already running around, laughing and playing, while my siblings and their spouses settled in, ready to relax. But me? I was on a mission. After the initial greetings and settling in, I started exploring the cottage. I poked around in every nook and cranny, trying to soak in the charm of the place. The living room had a big fireplace, and the kitchen was filled with the smell of baked goods. Everything felt warm and inviting, but my eyes kept drifting to a door at the end of the hallway. It was old and weathered, with a rusty doorknob that looked like it hadn't been turned in years. I had heard whispers from my sister about a locked room in the cottage, but she hadn't said much more than that. My curiosity was piqued. What could be behind that door? I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. Should I really be snooping around? But the temptation was too strong. I had to know. After a while, I decided to take a closer look. I wandered down the hallway, glancing back to make sure no one was watching. The door stood there, almost calling to me. I reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked tight. I sighed, feeling a bit defeated. But then I thought, maybe there's a key somewhere in the cottage. I started searching through drawers in the kitchen, hoping to find something that would fit. I rummaged through the junk drawer, pulling out old utensils and random knickknacks, but no key. I moved on to the living room, checking under the couch cushions and behind the books on the shelf. Still nothing. I was starting to feel like I was on a wild goose chase. Just when I was about to give up, I noticed a small key hanging on a hook by the back door. It looked old and a bit rusty, but it had a certain charm to it. My heart raced as I grabbed it, wondering if it would fit the locked door. I hurried back to the hallway, my excitement building with each step. I inserted the key into the lock, my hand shaking slightly. The key turned with a satisfying click, and I pushed the door open. The room was dark, and I squinted to see inside. Dust hung in the air, and I could make out some shapes, old furniture, a table, and a bookshelf. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the room had secrets waiting to be uncovered. As I stepped inside, I heard a faint rustling sound. My heart raced. Was someone else in here? I glanced around, but the room was empty. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and moved further into the room. The air was thick with dust, and I could see cobwebs hanging in the corners. It felt like I had stepped into a time capsule. I started exploring the room, running my fingers over the furniture and peeking into boxes. There were old toys, faded photographs, and a few pieces of clothing that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. But what really caught my eye was the bookshelf. It was filled with odd items, an old clock that had stopped ticking, a broken compass, and a small, tarnished locket. I picked up the locket, feeling a chill run down my spine. It was engraved with initials, JS. I opened it, hoping to find a picture inside, but it was empty. I felt a strange sense of loss, as if the locket held a story that was now forgotten. I put it back on the shelf and continued my exploration. That's when I noticed a dusty journal lying on the table. I picked it up, wiping off the dust to reveal a leather cover. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing pages filled with neat handwriting. The journal belonged to a girl named Clara, who had lived in this cottage many years ago. As I read through the entries, I learned about her life, her dreams, her friends, and her family. But as I flipped further into the journal, the tone changed. Clara began to write about feeling trapped in the cottage, about strange noises and shadows that seemed to follow her. The last entry sent chills down my spine. She wrote about a day when she went missing. She described feeling watched and wrote that she was afraid to be alone. The last line read, "If anyone finds this, know that I am not gone, just lost." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. What had happened to her? Why did she disappear? The room felt heavier now, as if Clara's presence lingered in the air. I glanced around, half expecting to see her ghostly figure standing in the shadows. The noises I had heard earlier now felt like echoes of her story, calling out to me from the past. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the living room, and I jumped. My heart raced as I spun around, the journal still clutched in my hand. I could hear my family laughing and chatting, but something felt off. I quickly shoved the journal back into the drawer and closed it, deciding it was time to leave this room. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly turned around, and there, blocking the exit, was a shadowy figure. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. Panic surged through me, and I felt like I was frozen in place. I had to get out of there. I rushed toward the window, but it was too high for me to reach. The figure moved closer, and I could feel the air grow colder. I didn't want to stick around to find out what it wanted. I turned back to the door, my heart racing, and pushed against it with all my strength. The door swung open, and I stumbled out into the hallway. I ran down the corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I dashed into the living room, where my family was gathered, oblivious to the chaos I had just experienced. I burst into the room, breathless and wide-eyed. My family looked up, surprised by my sudden entrance. I tried to explain what had happened, how I found the locked room and the journal, but the words came out in a jumble. I could see the confusion on their faces, but I didn't care. I just wanted to warn them. We quickly gathered our things, and I could feel the unease settling over the room. My siblings started asking questions, but I could barely focus. All I could think about was the shadowy figure and Clara's haunting words. I knew we had to leave this place before something worse happened. As we stepped outside, I felt a rush of relief wash over me. The fresh air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. We piled into the car, and I glanced back at the cottage one last time. The curtains in the window fluttered, and I shuddered, realizing that some secrets are meant to stay hidden. We drove away in silence, my mind racing with thoughts of Clara and what had happened in that locked room. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something sinister. My family chatted about dinner plans and the next family reunion, but I was lost in my own thoughts. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found in that room. Who was Clara? What had happened to her? I felt a deep sadness for her, knowing that her story was left unfinished. I realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some secrets are meant to stay hidden. I decided to do some research on the cottage when I got home. I wanted to learn more about Clara and what had happened to her. I found some old newspaper articles that mentioned a girl who had gone missing from the area many years ago. The articles were vague, but they confirmed my worst fears. Clara had vanished without a trace, and her family had never found out what happened to her. As I read through the articles, I felt a sense of responsibility. Clara's story needed to be told. I couldn't let her be forgotten. I started writing down everything I had learned, piecing together her life and the mystery of her disappearance. It felt like a way to honor her memory, to give her a voice when she had been silenced for so long. Months passed, and I continued my research. I reached out to local historians and even visited the cottage again, this time with my family. I wanted to show them what I had discovered, to share Clara's story with them. They were supportive and understanding, and together, we explored the cottage once more. This time, we didn't go into the locked room, but we talked about it. We discussed how important it was to remember those who had come before us, to honor their stories and their struggles. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that Clara would not be forgotten. In the end, I learned that some secrets are meant to stay hidden, but some stories are meant to be shared. Clara's story became a part of my family's history, a reminder of the importance of curiosity and compassion. I realized that while some mysteries may never be solved, the act of remembering can bring comfort and healing. As for the locked room, it remained a mystery, but it was a mystery that I could live with. I had faced my fears, uncovered the truth, and learned to appreciate the stories that shape our lives. Clara's story would always be a part of me, a testament to the power of curiosity and the importance of remembering those who came before us.